It's time for story time!
Welcome, everyone. Let the story time begin. Welcome, everyone. It's time for story time. Today's story will come from 5-Minute Stories, and today's fairy tale is The Princess and the Pea. Let the story time begin. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a handsome prince. He had loving parents, plenty of friends, and lived in a wonderful castle with a wonderful life. But one thing made him sad. He did not have a wife. The prince had always wanted to marry a princess, but he wanted her to be clever and funny and loving and kind. None of the princesses that he met at parties and balls, they wasn't quite right. Some of the princesses were too mean, and some were too rude. Some were too quiet, and others were just too loud. And some were just plain boring. So, the prince decided to travel the world in hopes of finding the perfect princess. He met many more princesses who tried to impress him with their beauty, their dancing, and their baking. But still none were quite right. I'm never going to meet the right princess, he sighed to himself. Oh, where is that girl of my dreams? Months passed without success, so eventually the prince headed back to his castle. Cheer up, my son, said the king. You are still young. One day you will meet a wonderful girl, just as I met your mother. The king smiled at the queen, but he was at a loss to know how to make the prince happy again. Then one night, when the king and the queen had begun to give up hope for their son ever finding a bride, there was a terrible storm. Thunder roared, lightning flashed, and the rain poured down. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the wooden castle door. I wonder who could be out on such a terrible stormy night, said the prince. When he opened the door, a pretty young girl stared back at him. She was soaked from head to toe. Oh, please, Your Royal Highness, may I come in for a moment? She pleaded. I was traveling to see some friends, but I got lost in the storm, and now I'm very cold and very wet. The prince ushered the poor girl in out of the wind and rain. You poor thing. You poor thing, said the queen. You must stay the night. You cannot travel in this weather. The prince smiled at the girl. What is your name? He asked her. I'm Princess Penelope, she replied. You are very kind. I don't want to be a bother to you. As the words of the princess, the queen smiled to herself. I wonder, she thought, but she didn't say anything. She took the girl's hand and said aloud, Of course not, my dear. Come in. Let's get you warm. Now, once the princess had changed into some dry clothes, the queen invited her to have some supper with the family. The prince listened contentedly as the charmed princess chattered away over their meal. He could not stop gazing at her. She was clever and funny and loving and kind. By the end of the evening, the prince had fallen in love. Now, the queen was delighted when she saw what was happening, but she wanted to be sure that Princess Penelope was a real princess. She went to the guest room in the castle and placed a tiny pea under the mattress. Then she told the servants to pile 20 more mattresses onto the bed. Then the queen had 20 feathered quilts piled on top of the 20 mattresses. "Now we shall see if you are a real princess," muttered the queen to herself. The queen showed the princess to her room and tucked her into the towering bed. "Sleep well, my dear," she said. In the morning, the princess came down to breakfast, rubbing her eyes. "How did you sleep, my dear?" the queen asked her. The princess didn't want to be rude, but she couldn't lie. "I'm afraid I hardly slept a wink," she replied, stifling a yawn. "I'm so sorry, my dear," said the queen. "Was the bed not comfortable?" "There was so many lovely mattresses and quilts. It should have been very comfortable," replied the princess. "But I could feel something lumpy and bumpy, and now I'm black and blue all over." The queen grinned and hugged the girl to her. "That proves it," cried the queen. "Only a real princess could be able to feel a tiny pea through many, many mattresses and 20 feathered quilts." The prince was filled with joy. He had finally met the princess of his dreams. Not long after that, the prince asked Princess Penelope to be his wife. She happily agreed, and they were married in the castle. The prince was never unhappy again, and as for the pea, it was put in the Royal Museum as proof that perfect princesses do exist. The end. You did a great job with reading today. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of new books weekly.